and see where we are at in the Rambam. We are now in the section called Foundations of the Torah, and we are learning chapter 2. And to take a step back, the Rambam wrote a number of works. One of his works is called the Mishnah Torah. Mishnah Torah means second to the Torah. The Rambam actually suggested that once one has read the Chumash, the 5 books of Moses, one can then move on to learn the work of the Rambam, and he will cover every subject, even though there are hundreds of books in between. So Mishnah comes from the word sheni, which means second. And he was saying this comes second after the Torah, right? After reading the 5 books of Moses, you could read me, the Rambam, and I will fill you in with whatever you need to know. Now, this set of Mishnah Torah has 14 volumes, and we are in this course at the moment covering the first volume, which is called Sefer Hamada, the Book of Knowledge. And within this Book of Knowledge, the Rambam has 5 subjects, and the first of those 5 subjects is Yesodei HaTorah, Foundations of the Torah. This has 10 chapters. Yesterday, you covered the first chapter, which dealt with belief in God and how it is a mitzvah to know that there is a God and what that mitzvah entails, and that there is no other God and that God is one. Those are 3 mitzvahs, and they were covered in yesterday's class. You are always welcome to go over that either inside the text, which is on the website, or you could go over yesterday's class. But today we moved on to chapter 2. Chapter 2 has 12 halachas, and we will be running through these halachas, please God, in the next couple of minutes. Very, very interesting stuff, fascinating stuff. So here we go. Moving on to the next of the mitzvahs. It is a bit hard, so I'm going to read in Hebrew, in English. Perhaps we could get a bit of a consensus at some time what majority of people would like to be done, and we could follow accordingly. So I'm going to start reading in Hebrew, and then we'll see how it goes. Hakel hanichbad v'hanoira hazeh. This awesome, glorious God, mitzvah la'ahavai. It's a mitzvah to love him, and to fear him. What is the source of that? As it says in the Torah, es Hashem Elokecha. We say this every day in the Shema. The opening words of the Shema are that you shall love God, your Lord. It's a mitzvah. It's a mitzvah to love him. It also says, es Hashem Elokecha tira, fear God, your Lord. So we see over here that 2 of the 630 mitzvahs are the love of Hashem and the fear of Hashem. Yesterday it was asked if the Rambam wrote a book of halacha, of laws, then why was there a whole discussion of what sounded more theological? But the Rambam in his book of laws says that we're going through all of the different mitzvahs in the Torah, and part of those mitzvahs are the mitzvahs to love Hashem and to fear him. And so these are actually not just one of the mitzvahs, but perhaps the most important, and therefore they come right at the beginning of his entire halachic work. The obvious question is, how could you be commanded to love? How could you be commanded to fear? Either you have it or you don't. Like the common expression goes in society, they have fallen in love. They fell into it. It wasn't something that they decided, but they just discovered it. So how can Hashem command us to love him or to fear him? So the Rambam answers this question in the second halacha, how can we? And now I'm going to read along the English. You are welcome to read in the Hebrew as well, so that we cover the material in time. And as I said, please share feedback as far as your personal preferences. Okay, I see I have a request already, so we'll do it with the Hebrew. So how does a person come to love and fear Hashem? When a person contemplates Hashem's wondrous and great deeds and creations, and he will appreciate Hashem's infinite wisdom that surpasses all comparison. There's nothing that could be compared to it. Leda Hashem Agadol. He will immediately love, praise, and glorify him, yearning with tremendous desire to know Hashem's great name. Kamosha Amar David, as King David said, Tzama nafshi le'elokim kel chai. My soul thirsts for Hashem, for the living God. So what the Rambam is saying is that one can be commanded to love. Why? Because when a person understands something, then he develops an emotion for it. That's what so much of advertising is. Advertising sell a product. What are they doing? Advertisers are trying to engender within the receiver a feeling and affinity towards the product, which means that when we come to understand something with our head, that generates a feeling. And so, yes, Hashem can command us to love him, because when we stop and we recognize Hashem's greatness and we think about it, we contemplate on it, meaning that we give some time to really give it some thought, then we will most certainly come to love him. And not only will we love him, we will fear him as well. Fear over here, we're talking more than just fear of punishment. That's a more childish level of fear. Fear over here is, if you're in, an example of that would be, for example, stage fright. If a person has stage fright, it's not that they're afraid somebody will hurt them, but because they understand the power that is in front of them, they feel intimidated and they have fright. They realize there's so much power in this room. So when one realizes Hashem's greatness, it causes a level of fear, not of punishment, but it's kind of being awe-stricken, recognizing how powerful Hashem is and how small we are. And that's what the Rambam continues to say. And when he thinks about these things, he immediately recoils. Realizing that he is, relatively speaking, tiny, lowly, a dark creature, standing with his flimsy, limited wisdom before he who is perfect of knowledge. Again, as King David says, David, when I see your name or your heavens, the work of your fingers, I wonder, what is man that you should recall him? So when we would stop and think about how powerful Hashem is, it will both cause us to have a yearning to want to learn more about him, to become closer to him, and simultaneously a sense of awe, realizing how insignificant we are before such a great Hashem. Now, Hashem still wants us, and we matter. And he says that he puts the world into our hands to make a difference. So this doesn't mean that we become insignificant and that's where it ends. It means that relative to Hashem, we realize how small we are, but nonetheless, he still has empowered us to do the mitzvahs and to do what we have to do. And based on these concepts, I will explain important principles regarding the deeds of the Master of the Worlds to provide a foothold for a person of understanding to develop a love for Hashem. As our sages have said, in this manner you will recognize he who spoke and brought the world into being. So the Rambam is saying that although I am a book of laws, halacha, it's really not just a legal work. It's a book that will teach us how we can serve God through all of his mitzvahs. Now, from the most fundamental mitzvahs, are the mitzvahs to love Hashem and to fear Hashem. And since we see that the only way we could come to love him and fear him is if we think about him and we think about his greatness, therefore the Rambam is saying, I feel it necessary to include in this compendium of Jewish law a few thoughts that a person should think about that will engender within him a love and a fear of Hashem. The slideshow is here on the left, so you could follow along there as well. It just gives you a bird's eye view of the chapter at large as we run through it. So we've said the way to come to love Hashem is through contemplating his greatness. And so here we go. The Rambam now continues with what is known as Maaseh Merkava. Really, we're going to learn about Hashem. whatever we ever learn, as the Rambam will say at the end of the section, is so finite and so minuscule relative to Hashem's true greatness. But nonetheless, we have a mitzvah to love Him, and the way we will achieve that love is when we learn a little bit about Him according to our ability. And the Rambam starts by dividing all of creations, all of Hashem's creations, into three categories. Kol ma shebara HaKadosh Baruch Hu ba'olam nechlak l'shloisha chalakim. Vehen bruin shehen muchubari b'goylem v'tzura, v'hem hayvim v'nifsadim tamid. There are three categories of creations. Some of them are a combination of matter and form, and they are constantly coming into existence and ceasing to exist. For example, kamay gufay ha'adam, v'behema, v'hatzmachim, v'matachos, bodies of man, beasts, plants, and metals. So this is really the idea of decay and how constantly things are born and things eventually deteriorate and they cease to exist. And from a scientific perspective, science looks at all of the world in that regard. It's interesting. The Rambam now is actually going to say this is only one of three categories of creations. There's one type of creation that comes into being and as a matter of time ceases to exist. But the Rambam says there's another type of created entity which actually just lasts forever, which is interesting. So what's the second? Category number two are creations, also a combination of matter and form, but they do not change from body to body and from form to form as the first category. Rather, their form is permanently fixed in their matter and they do not change as the others do. For example, the spheres and the stars which revolve within them. Okay, so that's category number 3 and 2. And he says, obviously the matter of this second category is different from other matter, and the form is different from other form because we're saying that they are lasting forever, as long as Hashem keeps them in existence. And category number 3, category number 3 are very interesting. They have form but no matter. For example, the angels. Because the angels do not possess bodies, but rather forms which are separated one from another. Now, this is already getting quite difficult to understand because as fleshly beings, we can't see form without matter. Maybe if we thought about the world of intellect, this concept can exist. Like there's a known saying that if somebody says, this is mentioned in the Tanya, if somebody says that that idea is such a great idea that I can't even touch it with my finger, you'd laugh at him because no idea can be touched by the finger. So really the concept of the spiritual or maybe the intellectual are ideas that have a form but not a matter. But that's not what the Rambam is speaking about right now. Let's not confuse things. The Rambam is saying that there are created entities in this world. They are beings of form without matter, and they are the angels. So those are our three categories: form and matter that change, form and matter that don't change, and form without matter. And now the Rambam is going to speak about the form without matter, namely the angels. And where he is leading to is to speak about their knowledge of Hashem and Hashem's knowledge of them. And if we were to think a little bit about these ideas, it will engender within us an appreciation, a love, and a fear of Hashem. So, the Rambam just made a statement that they don't have a body. So he needs to back that up, because if you look at the prophets seem to say otherwise. Even today, people like to draw images. There are different types of images. I'm sure if you Google search an angel, you'll have all types of images that come up. So, Google may certainly have it wrong. It could be anybody doing anything. But even in the Lahavdil, in the prophets, we find descriptions of angels. So how does that work? And this actually is a similar thought process to what we had yesterday in the Rambam. Yesterday he asked, why is it that we see that Hashem is referred to as having a body? And he explained that it's just borrowed terms, and he's going to say the same thing regarding the angels. What is meant by the prophet's statements that they saw the angels of fire or with wings? This was all in prophetic vision and as a way of a parable. So why were they using even any analogy? Why talk about wings? Why talk about fire? He says they were just bringing out a point. What was the point they were bringing out? That they're not like bodies, they're not heavy like bodies, rather like fire that doesn't have weight, or like wings that allow one to fly, meaning that the angels are not having to physically move from place to place. So these were all just analogies. Just like regarding Hashem, we refer to Hashem as a consuming fire. Hashem is certainly not a fire, it's just an analogy. And like the Tehillim says, he makes his angels as winds. Does it mean that that every wind is an angel, or every angel is a particular type of wind? Not at all. It's just analogies to help us understand that angels are not physical, and to try to understand them a little better. Okay, so now we're talking about angels in halachas 4, 5, 6, and 7. So now that we know that they don't have a body, so then what separates one from the other? They don't have a body. Answers the Rambam, he says because their existence is not alike. Rather, each one is below the level of the other and exists by virtue of its influence in a progression of levels, one above the other. So, what separates one from the other? That they are on different levels. They're not in separate physically geographical places, but if you are able to map out a spiritual geography of different levels, that's what differentiates one angel from the next. And they all come from the power of Hashem and His goodness. And this is what King Solomon alludes to, saying, because above the one who is high, there is a watcher, and there are others higher than them, saying that each angel comes from one that is above it. When we reach the end, we're going to say that this is really lofty stuff. This is deep. So we're going to put in a bit of a disclaimer at the end. But stick with me, and we'll see where we go with this. Just to clarify, what does it mean one's lower than the other? It doesn't mean in place. Like one person that's sitting higher than his friend. Rather like two sages that we say, we say that the one sage is greater than the other. What do we mean? We mean in wisdom. That he has a higher level of wisdom. Like we could say that a cause is referred to as being higher than its effect. An analogy for this, which I once heard, which is a beautiful one, from one of my teachers, Rabbi Yol Khan, was of children that hear their fathers arguing. And the one father is saying, let us say that Obama is a bigger president, and the other child saying, no, Bush is a bigger president, and they're arguing this way and that way, and the fathers are arguing, and the kids, they turn around to the parents, they say, what are you talking about? It's very simple. Take a measuring stick and measure them, and you'll see which one's bigger. What's there to argue about? Is the child wrong? The child's not wrong, because the child thinks that bigger means in kilograms or in centimeters. What they don't realize is that there's a bigger that's much bigger than the bigger that the children relates to. So similarly, when we speak about the angels and one being above the other, we shouldn't start imagining some form, because we said, or some matter of wings and one on top of the other. No, this is all in level, one being on a higher level than the other, not one being physically higher than the other. Parenthetically, this is why we discourage the study of Kabbalah for the layman, because the layman could read words of the Kabbalah and think that he understands them, but he's understanding them on a relatively childish level to what is really going on. And that's why the Rambam here at the outset says when we speak about the angels, don't think that they only have form, they don't have matter, don't think they're physically higher than the one, higher than the other, rather there are different spiritual levels. And now he actually goes through the 10 different types of angels. There are a total of 10 different types of angels. Moving on to section 7, and with that we'll conclude our study about the angels. So the different names of angels go on their levels. So the highest level angel are called chayot, which actually is the same word as wild animals. They're spiritual wild animals, meaning they're wildly in love with Hashem, like an animal with tremendous excitement. Va'aifanim, and lower than them are another type of angel called Va'aifanim, and then Erelim, and Chashmalim, or Srafim, or Malachim, Belekim, or Bnei Elekim, or Kruvim, Ve'ishim. These are 10 names or categories of levels of angels. Kol Ela Asar Hashem V'Shidikru Ben Amalachim Al Shem Esem Malish Lehen Hein, or Mailish Eilemaylim Ben Eilemayla Sakel Baruch Hu Himalis Atzurish Dikrus Chayas. So these 10 names refer to 10 levels. And the highest level are the angels that are called Chayat. So if you look at the Siddur, just before we say the Shema, or this is also in the repetition of the Amidah by the Kedusha, when we have a minyan, we say, Va'aifanim v'chayas ha'kodesh. Aifanim and chayas ha'kodesh. We're referring to 2 types of angels. Barash Gadol, with great commotion, they praise Hashem. That's why in the prophecy, we refer to this level of angels called Chayot as being under Hashem's throne, because they're the highest level angel. The lowest level angel, number 10, is angels that are called Ishim, which is like people, but they're not people, they're still angels. But they're on so low a level that they're actually able to talk to prophets and be seen by prophets in visions. And therefore they're called Ishim, like the word Ish, which is person, because they're close to people. If you feel that this is totally above your head and you're totally losing me, then that's actually a good thing, because that's what the Rambam's about to say. But nonetheless, the Rambam still felt it important for us to take a little bit of time to understand how small we are and how great Hashem is, in order to be able to engender a love and a fear for him. So now he moves on to the final point before he wraps up, which is knowledge. The angels knowing Hashem, and Hashem knowing everything. So now let's talk about the angels and all of creation knowing Hashem. All these spiritual forms are alive. They're real. They're not just imaginative. They're real entities. They actually exist. They don't have matter. And to us physical beings, it seems like it's airy, but they are realities. They're real. And they recognize the Creator, and they know him. With a very great level of knowledge. Kol tzura v'tzura, each according to lefi ma'alasa, its level, v'lo lefi gadla, but not according to its greatness. So whatever level it's on, wherever Hashem has put that particular entity, that will determine how much of an understanding they could have for Hashem. But don't get me wrong, even the highest level is not really able to comprehend Hashem's ultimate truth, who as he is per se. Rather, it's a limited knowledge of comprehending and knowing him. So relative to what Hashem is per se, they don't know him. But relative to that creature, which is one level lower than it, they know him better. So knowledge is obviously a relative thing, at least our knowledge. He says all 10 level angels down to the lowest level, level 10, are all able to understand Hashem in a way that us human beings, which have flesh, who have not only form but also matter, will never be able to understand. But none of them are able to understand Hashem himself. So this is as far as understanding Hashem. That if we get convinced that we're super intelligent and we're going to start understanding how Hashem works, the Rambam is telling us that we don't even make it to the 10 levels of angels, and the bottom of them already has a much greater understanding of Hashem than we do, and he's still level 10. And the highest of angels also doesn't have an understanding relative to Hashem himself. So all of this helps us realize how great Hashem really is. That's as far as us trying to understand Hashem. Now let's talk about Hashem's knowledge of us in the next two sections, 9 and 10. I'll pick up the pace a little bit because I see that we are running out of time. Everything that exists outside of Hashem, from the highest level angel down to the smallest mosquito in the depths of the earth, all comes from Hashem's truth. And since Hashem knows himself, his greatness, his beauty, his truth, therefore he knows everything and nothing's hidden from him. So how does Hashem know what's going on in my life? Very simple, because I come from him. And so if he knows himself, he knows me too. And now the Rambam is going to speak about how Hashem's knowledge of things is different from the human understanding of things. If you would like me to do the Hebrew, I'll have to apologize because we've run out of time, but I encourage you to read it either by yourself or after the class. The Holy One, blessed be he, recognizes his truth and knows it as it is. He does not know with a knowledge which is external to him in the way that we know for ourselves and our image are not one, meaning there's a person, and then there's the person's brain, and then there's the thing that the person wants to know about. So there's a few separate entities coming together. There's me, my power of intellect, and the subject matter. But by Hashem, the Creator, may he be blessed, his knowledge and his life are one from all sides and corners in all matters of unity. They're all absolutely one. Were he to live as life is usually conceived, or know with a knowledge that is external from him, there would be many gods. Him, his life, his knowledge. Meaning, the second you're going to start saying that just as human beings have different parts to us, so too Hashem has different parts to him, then it means there's more than one God. That goes back to a violation of yesterday's mitzvah, which is to know that there's only one God. There would be him, his life, his knowledge. The matter is not so. Rather, he is one from all sides and corners in all matters of unity. Thus, you could say he is the knower, he is the subject of knowledge, and he is the knowledge itself all in one. This is a huge philosophical discussion. I was actually hoping to touch on it just briefly. The Rambam got serious flack for saying these words that Hashem and his knowledge are all one. People said, how could you use a term knowledge, which is a description relative to Hashem? But then there's responses to that. It's a big debate, a phenomenal discussion. It's discussed in the second chapter of Tanya in the footnotes, which itself needs lots of books of explanations. As we continue to see over here, this matter is beyond the ability of our mouths to relate or our ears to hear, nor is there the capacity within the heart of man to grasp it in its entirety. In expression of this concept, Genesis states, by the life of Parai, and Shmuel says, by the life of your soul, but Shmuel does not say, by the life of Hashem, but rather life Hashem, meaning Hashem and his life are not two separate things. As God lives, this shows that the Creator and his life are not two, as are the lives of living beings or the lives of angels, rather that thus he does not recognize and know the creations in terms of the creations as we know them, but rather he knows them in terms of himself. Thus, since he knows himself, he knows everything, for the existence of everything else is dependent on him. So this is an amazing phenomena that Hashem knows everything just by knowing himself. Now, the Rambam concludes and he says, the concepts that we have mentioned about the subject matter in these two chapters are like a drop from the sea when compared to what is necessary to explain. We've just scratching the surface. This explanation, this is the key word, the explanation of all the fundamental principles of these two chapters is referred to as Ma'aser Merkava. And he's going to say now that that's actually not for everybody to learn. And that's why the Rambam didn't give us all the explanations. He just gave us a few tidbits. The sages of the early generations commanded that these matters should not be explained except to a single individual at a time. He should be a wise man who can reach understanding with his powers of knowledge. In such an instance, he is given fundamental points, and an outline of these concepts is made known to him. He is expected to continue to contemplate until he reaches understanding with his powers of knowledge and knows the ultimate meaning and depth of the concept. These concepts are extremely deep, and not every person has the knowledge necessary to appreciate them. In his wisdom, Solomon described them with the metaphor, lambs for your clothing. The root kevas, lamb, also has the meaning hide. Thus, our sages interpret this metaphor to mean matters which are the secrets of the world will be your clothing. They will be for you alone, and you should not discuss them in public. Concerning them, the Proverbs teach they shall be for you and not for others with you. Similarly, it says in Shir Hashirim, honey and milk will be under your tongue. The sages of the early generations interpret this as a metaphor. Subjects that are like honey and milk should be kept under your tongue. In summary, the Rambam is saying that these are deep concepts, and before you decide that you're going to start writing a PhD on understanding the different levels of God, realize that you've got to be on quite a spiritual level. But nonetheless, it's fascinating that the Rambam included them in his book, which he said every single person should learn, like young and old. This is an obvious question. So is it only for one wise man at a time, super wise man, or is it to be taught on a Zoom to a whole crowd of people? So the Rebbe explains that the difference is whether it's a full explanation or just giving the general concept. The Rambam said it's important for every Jew to know these ideas exist. It's just to give a little bit of a taste. But if you want to write a PhD on it, you got to know your place. Thank you for joining us. Wishing you a wonderful day. You're welcome. I'll stick around for questions if you have any. I will stop the live stream.